Welcome to Stay Sparked.
On today's episode, we talk about conscious dying.
We have a very special guest, Selena Jong, a death doula, who shares sparks of inspiration around so many different things related to the preparations of death, releasing taboo around conversations on death, and even eco-conscious options for what we can do with our bodies after we die.
Enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to Stay Sparked. I'm Betsy Finkelhu, the creator of the Power Affirmation Project and Somatic Bodyworker.
I am John Halcyon, the author of Love More, Fear Less, Float More, Steer Less, and live morning broadcasts for love ambassadors like you.
And today we have a very special guest, Selena Jong, a death doula and friend, who is going to share some inspiration with us today on a conversation around consciousness and death. So we're super excited to dive into this conversation with you, Selena. Welcome. And we always start with gratitude. So would you like to start us off with what you're grateful for today?
Yes, I'm grateful for my family, for being on this podcast on Halloween, a very auspicious day, so close to Dia de los Muertos. Being able to remember those that have passed, our ancestors, and just really feeling into family and having that really loving connection with everybody around me.
Beautiful. How about you, Halcyon? What are you grateful for today?
Well, that just sparked gratitude for me. I'm so grateful for the presence of my grandfather in my life. My Facebook memories today popped up some wonderful Halloween videos of him and I together. He passed in 2007, but I'm grateful that he's still such a presence in my life and such an inspiration on a daily basis.
Love that. Well, I'm going to stay in that same theme. I'm really grateful for life. You know, being in reflection of death with, here we are, Dia de los Muertos, and we're kind of in this time where the veil is thin to the other side, reflecting on death and really how auspicious that we have this conversation with you today. So to be in this body and to be alive is what I'm really grateful for. It's a miracle to be here. So really being grateful for life.
Beats the alternative.
That's right. So I'd love to give our listeners a little insight into who you are, and then love to hear your personal journey of how you got here. So I'm just going to go ahead and read a little bit of your bio so people can kind of get an insight. So as a certified death doula, Selena works with those who want to take ownership of their life journey. She assists with practical end-of-life arrangements, providing emotional and spiritual support, assists with creating legacies, living funerals, and ritual guidance. Selena works alongside the Death Network, a team of death doulas and funeral directors, to create and facilitate events, discussions, and experiences for the community. You also volunteer with hospice and sit beside actively dying patients at Sharp Grossmont in the 11th Hour program, also called No One Dies Alone. Wow, I have chills reading this. And Selena also hosts a free monthly death cafe discussion group in Encinitas at the Seaside Center for Spiritual Living. And she's also in Cardiff, for those of you in SoCal. So, wow, sister, amazing, so powerful what you're doing. And after all these years of getting to know you, it's really cool to get to learn more about what you've really been putting your energy into and how you've been serving. And so we would love to get to know a little bit more of how you have arrived to be a death doula and what led you to this place.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. I have been with death since I was little. My first really big experience with death was the death of my mom when I was 12. She was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1988. And about a year after her diagnosis, she went from becoming this, beautiful, plump musician. She was a piano teacher, artist, and she kind of withered away to an 80-pound, skeleton. She was skin and bones. And so after a fatal seizure one night, she died. And it was just shy. Well, I had just turned 13, actually. So she died 2 days after my birthday. And that was the very first experience of death that I had. It was a big moment. It was a very traumatic time for me. And since her death, there have been several people since then that have died. My father comes from a family of 11, and he's the second to youngest. So his eldest sibling was already having kids when my dad was maybe becoming, a teenager. So the age difference was vast. So my aunts and uncles were dying as I was growing up. My grandparents also died. In my 30s, my best friend died of breast cancer. That was really hard for me. And then since, my adult years, just it seemed that year after year, somebody was getting diagnosed and dying. And it kind of became not a joke, but kind of a joke with my friends like, Selena, you've experienced a lot of death. You need to get into death work. And that initial seed plant just was in my brain, spinning and spinning. And the whole time I was thinking, no, there's no way I could do that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of responsibility. And at the time, I was a civil engineer. I was in the engineering world for about 20 years.
Wow.
And it wasn't until 2021 that I decided to retire and stop working as an engineer because it just wasn't fulfilling. I knew that there was something more for me to do. And so I took a good 2 years to really just give myself permission to do nothing and explore myself and explore what else was out there that I realized, because my dad actually had just died at the same time, that it was the death of my dad that actually sparked me to birth becoming a death doula. So short of
with
getting
all of the all of this deaths that are happening, were you aware? You mentioned death work. At what point were you even aware that there was a thing such as death work?
I knew there was death. I knew there was a death doula work. I knew there was death work. I wasn't quite sure how I knew that. I just innately knew that there was this role that was available to people that needed guidance at the end of life. Probably just in the same token that there's birth doulas for people who are giving birth, for women that are birthing. There's assistance and support in that way. I knew that there was something on the other side in death work, in dying. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew maybe I had read an article or something, and it was a kind of a new, it's still kind of a new emerging concept. So it's not something that's known. But the seed was planted somehow, and it started taking root.
But you didn't have access to that, or the people that were dying around you didn't have access to it, or did they?
No, there was never. I didn't encounter anybody in my life that had a death doula.
Wow.
I would imagine most people don't. I mean, I've never even heard of that until the last few years, and it seems like, I don't know if it's just because it's my own little world here, I haven't really seen a whole lot of it. And now there's a lot more of it. More and more people in our age group and in our culture seem to be focusing a lot on that. Like, I know where I live right now in Asheville, there's a whole center for conscious living and dying. And there's a whole death doula training, and people are into it. And there's these death cafes, and it's becoming much more normalized, instead of like, oh, it's time for someone to die, then they have to go in isolation or go into hospice, or it's kind of like hidden.
Yeah,
I feel like I interrupted you. So after your period of break, then how did you get into the actual role?
Yeah, so I'm the type of person that I look for signs It's kind of my like woo-woo thing that I have. Like, okay, is this really what I'm meant to do? So if it is, send me a sign. Like, I really want to know if this is what is supposed to happen. I had recently had 3 people die within a month right before I asked that question. And after I asked that question, every night at clockwork around 3 a.m., I would wake up and those 3 people would be talking to me. And I just couldn't get it out of my head. And they wouldn't really be saying anything specific. I would just hear their name. I would just think of them. Maybe it was part of my grieving process, but I just, and it didn't happen to me any other time in my life. It just, these 3 specific people were kind of chatting to me in the middle of the night. And it happened for a week straight. It wasn't until I said, it was after that little chattering of these people who had died that I finally decided to say, okay, yes, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to try. I'm going to investigate and do some research. The chattering stopped. And then I said, okay, this is too coincidental. Give me another sign. So as I was reading something on the internet one day about death work, I scrolled to the bottom of the screen and there was a little article about an Anubis. And Anubis is the jackal, the death dog that you see in Egyptian mythology, or like in Egypt, the kings were buried with the jackal. You know what I'm talking about? Do you know
Mm-hmm.
Anubis?
Yeah.
My dog is a black dog with a long snout and long ears. Betsy, you've seen my dog before.
Yeah.
And as I was reading that article, my dog's sitting next to me, and I'm thinking, I have the death dog. And that was enough for me. And maybe it's all, bullshit, but it was just enough for me to just say, okay, I'm taking these little hints and I'm going to move forward. And so I decided to then take some certification classes. And the first class I took was very heart-opening, and it just welcomed me in. And I felt a flood of energy come through me as I was diving into Death Doula classes. And it was just it just felt so right. And it felt very, I felt like I was at home with what I was doing. More so than when I was working as an engineer. I felt I had imposter syndrome as the engineer. That was a profession that I made money in, but it wasn't fulfilling. And so stepping into death work and saying yes to becoming a death doula was very, it felt like a birth.
I
love that.
I love that. Yeah, it's if you're only listening, you might not know that she's wearing a skeleton outfit right now, which I can only assume is your daily uniform, and it's not just because of Halloween. So I love that you mentioned like coming home. I mean, as you were talking about your kind of calling to, or your awareness of this, we talk about Burning Man a lot on this show, and I had this strong kind of parallel to the way I view Burning Man and kind of the gifting mentality of viewing the world as, what are the cracks that I can fill? What are the things that are missing in the world? And it sounds like your whole life story is seeing this role that needs to be filled, and it's a kind of it's beautiful, poetic, tingly in my skin as you go, and the universe is like, yes, thank you for saying yes, because this is the crack that we need you to fill. It's really beautiful.
I have a question for you. So since you have gone through the training and now you are a certified death doula, what does that actually entail? I mean, I know that we read in your bio that you sit with people on hospice and you're there for them, and you provide all kinds of different services for people. So could you just kind of give us a little insight? What does it entail? Especially for someone out there that's listening that has never even heard of that.
Yeah, good question. So a death doula is basically an advocate for somebody that's dying and their care circle. So from the beginning, we would plan. So you're planning your death, basically. So from the time that you are, let's say you're diagnosed, you want to have a plan for what's going to happen when you are transitioning through to death. And then what happens after you die. And so that could be anywhere from, okay, so then let's start at the beginning with the logistical things. So there's a lot of logistical things that you have to make sure that you have in place before you die. So let's say getting all your bank accounts in order, a will or a trust. Do you have all your paperwork in one place so that whoever is attending to those affairs will have it all in one place and not searching for them when you die. Mortgage, lien, car insurance, social media passwords. There's a whole list of things to do. Once you get that in order, we come in and we can also talk about what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? Do you have any stories do you want to leave for people? Do you have any? There's also an ethical will. If you haven't expressed certain things that you want to tell your children or your grandchildren, maybe you want to tell your kids and your grandkids any tidbits of information about your relationship with your spouse that you haven't shared yet. There's a whole lifetime of stories and things that you can pass down that you might not necessarily have had the ability to or the outlet to do that. Then we can talk about what happens at actual time of death. Do you want to be medicated? Do you not want to be medicated? Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you not want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be on life-sustaining support or do you not? So we can get more into to those types of things also. And some people also want to get really detailed about what they want to listen to when they're dying. What do they want to be wearing? There could be certain people you want with you. There could be certain people that you don't want there. And that's important too. We could talk about also, let's say you have a terminal diagnosis. Maybe you want to have a living funeral. Let's celebrate you while you're still here. Let's not wait till after you've died to have all these great things said about you and people coming from the woodworks to come visit you and see you. But let's do that while you're still here, so we can plan for that too.
Wow.
And then
that's amazing.
There's a lot. And then the very last piece is then what do you want to do with your body after you die? And so there are lots of options now that are more available than before, not just conventional burial and cremation. Like Halcyon said, there's composting. So we can talk about that too. But so basically, once you've had all this planned, the death doula is the one that advocates for that to make sure that gets carried through and that's carried out. Because, sometimes what you want and what your family wants or your loved ones want don't align. So you want to be able to have someone advocate for those wishes.
Wow.
This is
That's
so awesome.
so amazing. It kind of reminds me of birth doula. It's very similar in the way. I recently just was a doula for one of my best friend's birth. And so many of these things were a part of the conversation, the preparations. How do you want it to go? What's it going to look like? What are you going to be listening to? How do you want your space set up? What do you want to do after the baby comes? All of these things. It is so powerful to be able to have those kinds of things prepared for you. And how beautiful that you can do that for these people to provide that space that could potentially be really uncomfortable for a family member to do or for anyone else to do, right? I mean, who thinks of doing those things because it's such a sensitive time already of having to say goodbye, that talking about passwords or talking about like living legacies might be really difficult. So what a beautiful, beautiful offering this is.
Yeah, I think it does. There's a massive benefit in just the shifting of focus into the death experience as being something that has options and that has some you have autonomy and control and choices and the ways to make things more beautiful or more, that so many people I know, death is not something that is there's a conversation about it or even acknowledged. And so of course there's fear around it. When it does happen, then there's decisions made by those who are still around that are done out of guilt, or like what's okay, now I need to show them how much I love them by buying a really expensive urn. It's like, well, I don't know if they would want that, but it's like, so I think it's so cool to have this, to make your death a part of your decisions as a human being, just that shift from just like, let's pretend it's not going to happen until it does that makes it so much scarier, I think.
Yeah, and you touched on something that is also a part of what death doulas do, and that's education, right? So typically when somebody dies, the default is go to a funeral home. Well, the funeral home's going to, like you said, try to sell you the most expensive urn or coffin because, your love is proportionate to the amount of money that you spend on them at death. But, funeral homes are a billion-dollar corporate industry, and it's been that way since the 60s. And so their best interest is just for you to spend more money. The doula's interest is to assist those people that are dying and their loved ones to do things in a more holistic way. How can we save money? What do you need? What do you not need? So going with options like green burial, home funerals are now becoming more, are done more, because with hospice, when you're at home, typically people are dying at home. So how can we now have a funeral at home like they did in the colonial times? Before the funeral industry came into existence, people were having funerals at home. So that our connection to death back then was more intimate. And when the funeral industry came in, it made us become more separated to death. So, we'll take the body and we'll prepare it, we'll wash it, we'll embalm it, we'll do all these things, and you don't have to worry about it. So then now our cultural shift in death has become very distanced. And so what we do, we want to bring that back home. We want to bring home funerals back and be able to educate and empower families to then tend to our dead, right? So we can now shroud the body in some, biodegradable linen or cotton. We can wash the body. We can do a ceremony at home. You can keep the body at home for not as long as you want, but for several days, done right. You can have a ceremony. You can wait for your people to come and have this beautiful ceremony, and then transport them to water cremation, composting, natural burial, things that, are more eco-friendly. And you don't have to spend $10,000, $20,000.
I love that so much. I feel like that there's such a care, that comes in that, because, I remember when my grandmother died, these strangers just came and picked her up, and they don't have really any gentleness or care about this woman who is very special in our lives, and they just take her away, and I don't know how they handle her, and to consider what it would have been like for all of us as a family to have tended to her, to lifted her and placed her gently on a pillow and to wrap her, and to do that is so meaningful, so powerful. And it really does. It sounds like, I haven't experienced it obviously, but it sounds like it would create a deeper integration and support of the grief process, because when someone close to you passes, it is a process to really go through that grieving and to let go and to be witness to somebody's body without the soul in it. I would imagine can bring so much to the family to really help them get to be with it. And rather than what they ended up doing too is then a couple of days later, we got to see her and she was like so done up and she had all this stuff pumped into her and it didn't even look like her. There was all this makeup and formaldehyde and it was very unnatural and this very thick coffin, which I can imagine coffins probably take a really long time to decompose. So I love what you're talking about with these eco alternatives for the body to go back to the earth.
I've got such a like the idea of taking space that is limited on our planet and reserving it. Once you're dead, let's reserve a space on our planet where this real estate is for you from now on, even though you're gone, like, you know, in a cemetery. It just feels like such a strange thing. I understand there's different beliefs and needs to you know, visit a tombstone, but it feels like I certainly, if I had the option of soil and greening myself and having my calories reused in the food supply, that would be my first choice. But my second choice would be to be recycled into the ecosystem for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys want to hear about what all our options are? What all the different...
Yes, please.
Yeah,
please.
I really do. I actually, you said one that I was like, I've never even heard of water composting or what water cremation.
Yeah, we can start there. Water cremation.
Yeah.
So our default is conventional burial and cremation. What our other options are now is water cremation. So water cremation is cremation with water with alkaline salts. Basically, so what happens is you get put in this vessel. So let me just back up. Water cremation has been around for a long time. I feel like the first water cremation vessel was invented in 1888. Water cremation has been mainly used with animals, with pets. So dogs, that's cats and dogs. That's how I first heard about it. When my dog died, the person that we used to come euthanize our dog at home, when they took her away, she asked if we wanted water cremation, and we were like, wow, yes, we want that, because she told us it was more eco-friendly. So when I became a death doula looking into water cremation, it's this vessel. It's a big metallic chamber, a cylindrical chamber, and you put your body into this casket and it goes into this chamber. The water that gets pumped in is 5% alkali salts, and it's high heat, high pressure, and it's kind of like a spa treatment. So think of this water just brushing over your skin, and what this process does, it breaks down all your soft tissue. So what you're left with is just the bone, and it gets pulverized and crushed down the same way flame cremation would. But you get about 20% more ashes. You still get ashes than you would flame cremation. And the water that is left is very nutrient rich, very, very high quality water that gets put back into the water system. And you could get an urn of ashes, and you could do with that the same way you would with flame cremation. It costs just a little bit more than flame cremation, but there's no carbon emissions at all. Flame cremation emit about 500 to 550 pounds of carbon emissions. So think of driving your car about 600 miles is what one body does when you cremate. So when you water cremate, there is basically no carbon emissions. You're just using enough electricity to power the facility. And it takes about 8 hours for this process to happen.
Whoa.
It's amazing. Wow.
That's awesome.
That's really cool. Thank you for that. What are some other options?
So there's composting. It's called natural organic reduction. And this is my favorite because you turn into this really rich, nutrient-dense soil. So your body is put in a vessel of straw, alfalfa, and it gets put into a pod that gets compost, just the same process as you would compost your food. Right. So your body is turned, it gets heated to a certain temperature to ensure that there's, pathogens get killed. And in about 40 days, your body, after this composting process, becomes this really nutrient rich soil. It's very dark, and you get about 1 cubic yard of soil. If there are any parts, like if you have like a hip, any medical devices that you have will get recycled out. Same with water cremation. Any parts will be left to get recycled. With flame cremation, whatever you put in that coffin, even the coffin, even if you're embalmed, everything is burned into the atmosphere. The reason why that composting is my favorite is because composting will sequester about 1,000 pounds of carbon emissions. So 1 composted body is equivalent to 2 flame cremations in negating the effects of that.
So you're actually contributing. Yeah.
You're contributing 1,000.
Yeah.
Yes, you're contributing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is just taking something that I've been thinking about to a whole new level, because I had this idea a while back around when I die, what I want. And I thought that I wanted to be cremated and have about 100 little baggies of my ashes getting spread out to different people that I love. And then they can have their own little special ritual with it, or go take me somewhere and spread it. But even more amazing, to spread out little flower pots with the Betsy soil.
Mm-hmm.
And they can plant little seeds. They can plant their little intention seeds to grow the Finkelhoo.
Yes.
Wow. That's really incredible. Composting is an option. That's beautiful.
One of the companies that I was just having a conversation with my parents about this, and that you can request as many, like up to a certain amount of quarts of the soil to put in your pots and have Finkelhoo flowers, But there's what you don't want delivered to you. They have these nature reserves that they've partnered with, so you can know that you are a part of a nature reserve, and they have different locations. That was just such a cool idea, that you're that you are a part of some beautiful place someplace. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but you're going to visit your loved one in a nature reserve versus a cemetery. Cemeteries are very sad, and they kind of, I don't know, they're kind of creepy, and they don't really have such a reverent feeling as maybe they used to. I don't know many people that go visit cemeteries very often anymore. But to go visit your loved one in a nature reserve?
I only know of visiting funerals from movies. That's
right.
That's something I know about it. So before I knew about all these cool options, my grandfather was cremated, and I took some of his ashes and I mixed it into the paint job of a pink motorhome. So it's got wings painted on the side, this big murals. And so his ashes are in it. So I still, to this day, I was there yesterday, I've got this motorhome that's got his ashes as a part of it. But I really, I love the more recycling into the world concept of having soil. That just feels so much more natural than, I liked my artistic way to keep him with me, but it seems more in line with his spirituality of being connected to the earth more so than his body to have him in a flower pot or a tree or a nature reserve. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like the earth, they want their bodies back.
Right.
We are all part of this system, this ecosystem. And why wouldn't the earth want us back just like it gets everything else back?
Yes.
And so natural burial is the last one I'll talk about. It is the way that we used to bury our dead before cremation. We would dig a hole in our yard and bury our dead back there, but we can't do that anymore. But you still can opt for natural burial if you can find a natural cemetery. And like Halcyon said, most of these composting businesses are partnered with conservation forests. So they donate part of, the soil to these forests to help replenish. Same with natural burial. Most of these natural burial sites are also part of a conservation forest that you can naturally bury 3 feet deep, not 6 feet. So the reason why you bury somebody 6 feet deep in a conventional cemetery is purely for aesthetics, so that the ground doesn't settle and then you get a bumpy surface, right? So it's all for maintenance. It's all for the pristine look. Natural burial is 3 feet because that's where all the microbes live. That's where all the nutrients live. So when you bury someone at 3 feet, you are guaranteeing decomposition. If you bury someone at 5 to 6 feet, there's nothing down there. It's just cold and dark. And it's a concrete vault, in the conventional cemetery. Unfortunately, you're putting a box around the body and it doesn't decompose. So that's why you see in movies, you dig somebody up 10 years later, 50 years later, and they're still there. So natural burial is the other option. It's not, again, it's real estate, right? So there is limited space, but your body does break down and does decompose in natural burial.
Yeah. All animals go back to the earth. Yeah. Yeah. So it only makes sense. Well, I love this conversation, and I'd love to kind of shift gears a little bit, kind of going a little back on the timeline, because something that you shared around the process of preparing people, I think that's really inspiring, and something I've been really contemplating a lot and having conversations with my mom. She's healthy, but we know that she will die one day. And how do we have these conversations about these specific things? And it is sometimes a little uncomfortable, a little sensitive, because of course we want her to stay here forever. And so I'm curious about some of the things that you mentioned around 5 wishes and wills, and how to have these kinds of conversations with our loved ones as they are healthy and well, before it gets to a place of feeling like that they're sick, or that, they can't actually make these decisions for themselves. So any sparks or insight that you might be able to share with us and our listeners about that?
Yeah. So a lot of times people don't want to talk about death. Oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen soon. It's not going to happen to me. But, we don't know. We could die tomorrow. We can die in 5 years, 10 years. The reality is we need to talk about it, right? And so how do we talk about it with somebody that does not want to talk about it or is in denial? And I have found the best way is to talk about what I want. So start talking about what do I want, and make it known to those around you. These are what my wishes are. I want to be composted. I want to have this music playing at my death. And just really start the conversation by being honest with what you want. And if that doesn't work, I have something called the Death Deck that I have, and it's right here.
Cute.
And it's a game, really. And so it can be, you're sitting around at dinner and you break out this Death Deck. And I actually did this with my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and they couldn't get enough of it because it sparked questions for them that they didn't realize that they could answer or wanted to answer. And I'm just going to pull one just at random.
Okay.
What it says. Let's see. Hopefully you get a good one. Oh, okay. Okay. This one says, your spouse dies. What do you do about money? A, not worry. I make plenty to maintain my current household. B, pat myself on the back for taking out life insurance policies. C, freak out. Move in with family and start playing the lottery. So then you kind of go around and you answer, and just from one card, this would spark conversation, and it'll start getting people to think about, okay, what do I do with my money? Even when they're at home, you left the party, this question will pop up somewhere in their subconscious later on. Okay, I gotta make sure I get all my affairs in order.
Yeah, I love that. The Death Deck. How many cards are in it?
Well, it's a pretty stacked deck, if you could say that.
Deck, yeah.
This
and you made this?
I did not make this.
Okay.
There's 112 cards.
Oh, you looked it up. Nice.
I just looked it up. Yeah.
Nice.
So this one is more of a party, kind of like a social party game, but there is one for more like end of life deck. So this one's more for like caregivers and healthcare providers to help facilitate conversations about end of life wishes. So it gets more technical about.
And that one's called the EOL.
Yeah,
EOL
end of life deck. So these are great tools.
That's great. That kind of gamifies it, makes it a little bit more playful. Take something that could potentially be heavy and serious into a more joyful, curious kind of conversation.
I have a question. If someone, is there like a checklist or something? If someone wasn't up for playing a game, but was like, okay, I'm ready to have a meeting. Like, what do I need to answer? Is there a more serious way to introduce those things?
Yeah. When I work with people, I have a checklist. I like to create what I call an end of life binder. And so this binder has all of that information. It has the checklist. You go through the checklist. I have people go and do their homework, and all the things are in this binder so that when you do die, when the time comes and you die, or it's nearing time, it's in a place where somebody can find it and that all your stuff is there. It's kind of little, I call it, it's like a gift, this is my gift to you,
Special.
The people that are going to be here. This has all the information that you need for my end of life.
All right, I have another question about this whole process. So who are the people that are actually hiring you? Is it the people that are on, that are on their deathbed, or is it family members? I'm asking this question based on a friend of mine's experience right now, where both of his parents are going through a lot of health issues and they're declining rapidly, and they both have a lot of resistance to talk about any of this. So would he be somebody that reaches out to you and hires you, or does there need to be permission from the parents? How does that all work? Because I could imagine there's certain sticky places when there's people that may have had strokes or different situations.
Yeah, so it's mostly people that are experiencing a loved one that is dying that hires me. I've had one person contact me who was looking into getting a death doula to gift to her friend who has terminal cancer. I have a client right now that hired me. She hired me herself, and she's dying. And so, anybody can hire a death doula, but you're right. The person that is dying has to be on board with the doula coming in, or the doula then just supports the family member, right? Because you can't be supporting someone that doesn't want support. So when I do come in, knowing that the person that's dying is resistive, I just have to make sure and gauge that that's something that they would want. And if not, then, sometimes then you can't work with them, and that's okay too. It's not the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that people who are doing assisted suicide, it would also be a situation where they would work with a doula.
Correct. So the client that I have that contacted me is currently eligible for medical aid in dying. It's called Dying with Dignity. And you have to have a diagnosis of 6 months or less from a doctor to be able to be eligible for the medication to take. And it is legal in California to have this. It's not, I think it's only legal in about eight other states. But yeah, that medical aid in dying is very intriguing to me, because I'm just dealing with, sometimes you're just dealing with just that moment, just that short window. So, luckily my client already has her affairs in order, and she's just wanting support the day of.
I mean, it's really an incredible thing to plan and schedule your exit. I've a couple that I've known over the last year that have left that way, and and to be making these choices of the music that you want playing, the people that you want, the people that you want to be meeting with on the days leading up. There was a friend's father who got the 6-month diagnosis and said, well, then I want to go next week, as soon as, and his family was kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, we want more time with you. And, but he ended up, for the next week, as people came to visit him, on his last day, he said, this has been the greatest week of my life. This is, and because of this short window, these conversations were had between him and his relatives and his children that had never been said, and there was this, it was so beautiful. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask about is when the person who was going to be dying made the choice of the date, a lot of the children really had a hard time with, how could you decide to give us less time than we possibly could have with you? And I imagine, the feeling is like, I don't want my last days with you to be me weak, and I want you to go out as strong as I can. But is that like, that seems like a really difficult navigating between family and the person. Is that part of the role?
Yeah, it is part of the role. I haven't experienced that yet, but it is definitely part of the role, navigating relationships between family and friends. Like, I want to, my client, she's like, my friends are having a really hard time because they want to be with me the day of, and I want it to be private. And,
right.
They want more time, but, this is what I'm going to choose. And, most of it, I'd say 100% of it is quality of life. Like you said, your friend didn't want to be weak. So it's like, I don't want to be, weak and not be able to talk and not have my faculties about me. I want to be strong and go out with a bang. And so not having quality of life is typically the main reason why people want to go when they say they want to go. I have a question for you guys. Knowing that you only have, let's say, 6 months, and people are coming, like Halcyon said, to be with you and having these really like great conversations and saying the things that you don't typically say. Like, I'm just curious, like, how could you see yourself like living your life like that? Like, I'm just wondering, and this is more, I don't know if this is actually a question for anyone. It's just more of like, I'm just throwing out this pondering of, if we had our life in that lens, like, how could we live more authentically like that every day, knowing that we only have a week? I'm going to be gone in a week. Can we carry that out into our daily lives?
Mm-hmm.
And having those authentic relationships like that. And why do we have to wait till we only have a week to be able to be in that?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to love ambassadors who are here in service to bringing joy and love and authenticity and connection and community to the world as much as we can. And with that kind of time pressure, I think it would probably just grow and expand and become this like effervescent, just powerful pop of the cork. I know that I would probably just love even more and reach out even more and probably just go into a very deep ceremonial process and connection to the divine, because that's essentially what's happening, right? If you like have a timeline to your death, it's basically a timeline to the timelessness, to releasing your physical form and going straight into the formless. I mean, that's pretty amazing to be able to have that. Obviously, I've thought about it. There's been a couple of times where I'm like really sick and I'm like, what if this is it? And some of the thoughts that came up that I was very surprised by was, wow, I need to clean out my junk drawers.
That's another gift for the people that are going to be left. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I'm like, wow, I'm gonna like get rid of some shit so people don't have to go through all my art and crystals and junk.
That's Swedish death cleaning, right? Like, just
right,
detaching from all the stuff,
physical stuff.
I think one of the one of the real gifts of this type of work you're doing is this just bringing that awareness of death more into our, because I think that I think it's really healthy to periodically visit the idea of your own death. I think that we're often discouraged, or it's considered morbid. One of my favorite philosophers, Alan Watts, says the most fundamental spiritual question is the game worth the candle? Is it worth it to keep going? And I think we have a suicide fear, like a taboo about that conversation. But like thinking about not being, the fact that you are being, that you exist, like keeping that in your awareness, as you said, it keeps you in this state of like, oh my gosh, I have precious time. I'm what am I going to do with the time I have left? Whether it's 6 months or a week or 10 years, like I have had a huge shift post 50, turning 50 of like, oh, I have a limited amount of time left. And I definitely have a limited amount of time when I'm going to have capacity in my body to do, physical activities. And so these vague ideas of someday it would be cool if I visited India, now I'm kind of like, I'm going to scratch that off the list. I don't think that's going to happen in this lifetime. Like, okay, so I got limited things. So I think that your very existence and your gift to the world is helpful to get us in that mindset and not being so afraid of it. I had such a benefit. My grandfather, I already mentioned a couple times. I got to spend the last 3 years of his life a lot of time with him. He died at 94, but he was so at peace. He referred to his room he lived in as his cocoon, and he talked about like, oh, well, if you could interview a fetus and ask it if it wanted to be born, it'd be afraid. And I imagine that my experience, in my next transition, it's equally as mysterious, but who knows? And so getting to spend time with someone who is so comfortable talking about death and so unafraid really was so healing and so beneficial to me. And I think that because there's so historically there has been so little death doula or death work that we experience, so many of us have been robbed of any sort of comfort or with any experience of dying. So I'm so encouraged by your work and this trend, and for what it does to our relationship with death and what it does to our relationship with life. I think it's so awesome.
Yeah, I think that with the popularity and the emergence of death cafes now, people are coming around and talking about death. I see a lot of younger people coming into the cafes now, not just the baby boomers, the 60 and above, the 30 and up group is really embracing death and dying. And I think they're holding on to that too, because they really are I feel that they're really more educated and attuned to the environment. And so green burial is very important to them. At least the ones that are coming in, they're very curious about what that is and what their options are. And they're more aware of what they're spending. So they don't want to spend $20,000 on a death if they can spend, $1,000 or even free. You can even donate your body to science and it costs nothing. So, the conversation is growing, I think, among people, and death cafes are definitely one way to get that out into the open.
I'm not familiar with that term. Can you tell me what that means?
I was going to say the same thing.
I assume it's not what they serve.
Right, I know, exactly. What are you drinking at these cafes? I know, I was wondering the same thing, like what kind of things are talked about at a death cafe? Because I have an assumption, but from what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like there's a lot of different things.
So Death Cafe was started in the 80s in London, and it has since grown. It was started by John Barsky. I might be butchering his name, but him and his mother started it in their home because they wanted a place. They wanted to be able to talk about death and dying freely with people that wanted to also talk about it. And so they started holding these death cafes in their home, and it was free. They would serve tea and cake, and people would come monthly and talk about any topic related to death and dying. So you could talk about near-death experience. You could talk about green burials. You can talk about your fear of death. Sometimes you don't even need to talk at all. You can just sit and listen. And so it became so popular that it moved out into an actual cafe. Then it just blew up to where now there's an organization, a nonprofit organization called deathcafe.com. You can go on there. And the idea is you can find a group to go talk about death with in I think over 80 countries. And they're all the same. They're all run the same. They're all run by volunteers. They're all nonprofit. There are guidelines to be able to go to a death cafe, and that is that you're not there to sell anything. There's no agenda. Everything is private. And so when you go to a death cafe, you're basically meeting with a group of people and you're talking about death and dying. Sometimes people have a diagnosis and their spouse doesn't want to talk about it. I get a lot of people that want to talk about their terminal diagnosis because their spouse doesn't. Or I've had someone come in and say, I'm really afraid of death. Like, I just want to talk about it and have people listen and not be judged or have people give you advice, because we come from a society, unfortunately, where you talk about something and you have a problem and you're constantly barraged with like, well, here's my advice, here's the solution. But at Death Cafe, there's no solution. We're not trying to solve your problem. We're here 100% to listen.
So powerful. That is so healing. Wow, I love that. And you have one in Encinitas, right? At the Seaside Center for Spiritual Living. It's every fourth Saturday of the month. Amazing.
At 10 a.m.
Wow. Well, this is a really inspiring conversation. So many sparks, and I feel like we could probably keep going, but in the sake of time, let's tune into some closing sparks to wrap it up. I'd love to start with my closing spark because I'm feeling really moved by the conversation here around alternatives for burial and for what can happen to our bodies afterwards. Thank you so much for illuminating so many options and really educating us today about water, cremation, and like the carbon footprint that comes from regular cremation. And just, it's really, really inspiring to learn more about that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, as compelling as your information has been, Selena, I'm not convinced. I've decided that I am not going to die. So thank you for your information, but I am not interested in. Wait, that's not what I was going to say. No, I'm so encouraged by the light that your work brings to this, as you said, this part of life that's so much like birth, but is just so, it's often so taboo, and it is so beautiful. I wanted to share my grandfather's dying words, his last words before he went home to hospice, and then was he said to my mom, "Isn't this exciting? I don't know what the next chapter is."
Mm-hmm.
I think that you can only have those words if you're thinking about it and having conversations about it. And so I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Thank you guys for having me. Ultimately, death work is community work. My goal is to really gather community around this conversation and really get the word out and get people talking about death and really create more opportunities and events and things where people can gather around to be able to sit in contemplation and talk about it and not be afraid of it. I mean, not saying that you're not going to be afraid. It is scary. I have fears. One of my fears is that remembrance, that's my fear, is that I'll be forgotten. So the more I remember all the people that have died and my ancestors, I feel that I will also be remembered. So thank you for having me in this conversation.
So beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that so much, Selena, and love to actually just check in with how can people find more of you in the world, your work in the world. Any plugs, shout outs for your work? people need to know more about what you do and who you are. So
yeah, my website is www.movingthrough.org. The name of my business is Moving Through. So my idea is that we're not dying. We are dying, but we're moving through this process, just like we're kind of moving, it's like water. It's like the water cremation. We're moving through this process. So movingthrough.org. I'm on Instagram at movingthroughdeath. So there I have conversations with a death doula where, things that kind of pop in my mind, I'll converse about. And then the Death Network. I work really closely with the Death Network down here in San Diego. They hold a lot of events down in South Park. And so we partner together to create death cafes and workshops and events. And my death cafe in Encinitas on every fourth Saturday from 10 to 11:30 a.m. at the Seaside Center for Spiritual Living. There is another death cafe that's held by the Death Network at Bravo Family Mortuary in Mission Valley. That's every third Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Amazing.
Right.
All I got.
So beautiful. Thank you for that. How about you, Halcyon? How can people find you?
Easiest way to find me is lifestudent.com. Has links to my books and t-shirts and my daily events. So every day at 9 a.m., if you want a little jolt of love ambassador connection, you can join me live on YouTube, the Hug Nation channel.
Amazing. And y'all can find me at my website also, poweraffirmation.com. That has all my tools that I've created to help with mindset empowerment and also the somatic bodywork that I do as well. So find me on there, and then also connect with me on the socials as well, Betsy Who, and just reach out. I always love connecting. So we also love, for those of you who have made it this far, please do take a moment to get on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars, please, by request. This helps to spread the sparks far and wide. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody. Just save the link and then just text it to a friend who might be inspired by this kind of conversation. It really helps us to get this podcast out into the world. So thank you so much for your support and for spreading the sparks. And in the spirit of our flow, we always love closing with an affirmation. So you guys ready to do a little closing affirmation?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take a moment, close the eyes if that feels good to you, and focus our mind on an affirmation of evolution. Because, right, death is evolution. So I embrace my own personal evolution in this life and beyond. I embrace my path of evolution in this life and beyond. I embrace this path of evolution in this life and beyond. I embrace my own personal evolution. I embrace my personal evolution. It's safe to talk about death. It's safe to talk about death. It's safe to talk about death. I love my life. I love my life. I love my life. I love my life. And I love you guys. Thank you so much for this conversation. So grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, stay sparked, people.
Find us on Instagram at Stay Sparked and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast.
Thanks so much for helping us spread these sparks.